Welcome to JC NERR and How We Got Here, the show where you get an inside look into the stories and experiences that brought each of our staff here to the reserve. So I'd like to extend a special thank you to our guest today, Tomas Grothues. So Tom is our research coordinator here at the reserve, and he has been with us for about a year and a half under that title, but as we'll come to learn, it's more interconnected than just that year and a half. So let's take a little bit of a rewind. So very beginning, what made you realize you wanted to have a career in the sciences and even have a career in research?
Well, I figured I wanted a career in the sciences once I found out what science was, or that's when I identified it. I was already interested in it long before I knew what it was. I grew up without a TV. We didn't have one in the family. What we had was National Geographic. And back in the early 60s, when I was born, that's when the Conshelf series was coming out. This is a whole series of articles about Jacques Cousteau's attempts to establish prototype habitats on the ocean floor, mostly in the Mediterranean. And so what they called the aquanauts would go down and live in these for extended periods of times. There was deep houses where they were under saturation conditions, and then shallower places like the starfish house. But they lived there for a long time, weeks to months, and people would bring them food, and they would use that to do operations underwater, exploration type things, but it was proof of concept. So I was really, really intrigued by that, by the pictures and the stories in that. We would go to the neighborhood parks, and I was always fascinated by knowing that something was happening under that flat lake surface. So there's people fishing around the end, and they'd put out a line and it would pull and they'd get something, and you'd look in their bucket, and this is when I'm a toddler, right? I always wanted to see what was coming up next, why one thing was pulled up one time or a different thing, like what's happening under that water that you can't see. And I'd always reach into these buckets and pull out the fish till the fisherman would tell me to stop. I was that kid. So very early on then already, I was scrounging like lost hooks and lines around the park, from the trees and stuff, from snags, from people casting and making cheese baits or whatever to catch fish. My mom tolerated that. I was also catching lizards and snakes. We lived in the neighborhood on the edge of kind of sage area, chaparral, and I could do that. But it was always fish that I liked the most. Mm-hmm. And in California, I had close access to the beach. I was always surfing and diving, snorkeling really early on. And I knew I wanted to do that. The thing was, what kind of job is in that? Yeah. So once I had high school, or even grade school biology, and then later on high school biology as a science, which started out with parasites. I still remember our opening lecture there. I was fascinated and saw the connection between where I wanted to work and the kinds of questions I was interested in, and that became marine biology as I understood it, and it remains that way.
Okay. Now, so you talked a little bit about elementary school and like how you were able to experience really what science is about in terms of elementary, and you're in high school as well. Now, from there, what college did you, what was your schooling post high school?
Well, first I did community colleges, mostly because of my friends. I knew already that I wanted to do marine science, but I wasn't very aware of where that was going to happen. And certainly even at Fullerton College, where I went first, they had a strong marine program. We're at the beach. We're very close to it already, right? So there's the people there that know that kind of stuff. And I had a fantastic professor, and it was just amazing to go. And I actually traveled quite a bit with him. His name was Howard Craig, and he was a huge influence in my life and career from early on. So with several other students that were in his marine biology classes that were going clearly gonna stick with the program, we went traveling with him, for instance, to Hawaii as a part of our scholastic career then. And we would just go hiking through Hawaii, along the cliffs, in the ocean. We went diving when we were there. And the whole time we were talking. He was Socratian in his teaching. So anything you wanted to know, he'd come back as a question to you all the time. And it was fascinating. And that's where I actually got into the field, the specialty that I really enjoy now, which is broadly defined as the abundance and distribution of fishes.
Now, at that community college, were you there for an associate program, bachelor program?
Well, I knew I was, wanted to move on to bachelor's program. They only had an AA, and really I was just figuring out where it is that I wanted to go and how to get into marine biology properly. And because of the mentorship that I had there, I pretty quickly figured out that that UC Santa Barbara was the place for me. That's in the University of California system. So that sits on a broad peninsula up in a place, a community called Isla Vista, just north of the city of Santa Barbara. And so it has water literally on 3 sides of the 2 campuses. And so there's always a swell coming from one side, and a little bit of protection from the other. So, and literally the dorms were built, on the bluffs on top of the beach. So you could surf and dive, literally suit up in your room and walk down. And I did that from day one. I mean, the day I got there, I went diving. And I remember that because my friend got shocked by an electric ray, a torpedo ray. We were doing an evening dive. He wasn't hurt. I was laughing so hard I flooded my regulator and my hands got water. But yeah, that was a really good place. It certainly kept me interested. And we were in the water for our field classes, dragging nets and seines, like I try to do with students here, both in the NERR and at Rutgers. So I finished a bachelor's there in aquatic biology, which includes freshwater systems.
Okay.
So that's the difference between marine biology and aquatic biology. Certainly, where I had the choice, I was doing marine systems, marine fishes in particular. And I also did like a senior capstone project there, working with tide pool fishes and foraging capability. And after that, I went to work for about 2 years for the University of Southern California. So here, that's what we would call USC West, to differentiate it from the University of Southern South Carolina. But the Trojans, Okay, so they had a research vessel fleet that they co-managed as part of a consortium with Cal State Long Beach and the Van Tuna, another vessel, which was Occidental College, so the kind of a marine sciences consortium. And USC also had the Wrigley Lab, which was this fantastic field station out on Catalina Island. During that time, one of the jobs we did was a contracted worker for a professor at Cal State Northridge named Dr. Larry Allen, who was doing work on recruitment of white sea bass, which is not white and it's not a sea bass or a bass. It's a big member of the drumfish family, or the croakers. And that fish was one that I was particularly enamored with as a spear fisherman. It's like the trophy fish for that coast. And he was working on it, so I was talking to one of his graduate students, and he said, "Oh, Larry's taking graduate students now." So I took a couple of his summer courses on fish ecology and fish behavior and got myself recruited as a master's student for him.
Okay.
And then back on the same boats that I had worked on previously, because he continued to use those boats for his work, but now I was the charter on the vessel rather than the deckhand or science tech. So again, we were back at all the islands now, the Channel Islands, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, Anacapa, Santa Barbara, Catalina, San Clemente, and ranging on trips all the way down the Baja Peninsula to Bahia Magdalena, sampling fish all along the way, fishing, spear fishing, to collect guts and gonads and blood samples for DNA and age and growth from the otoliths and size and weights. And we just fished and spearfished our way along, collected a tremendous amount of information in those days, really doing a survey of that fish diversity along the coast and looking at distribution and abundance. Really, these are fishes that were settled on reefs throughout that range, but had different population sizes at different places. And at that time, I was also interested in Bob Cowan's work. So in the meantime, Bob Cowan had become a professor at SUNY Stony Brook State University, New York, in Long Island. So when I finished my work with Larry Allen in California and was looking for a graduate program, that seemed like a really good next step. I talked to him. Larry Allen introduced me to him at a big Texas barbecue at one of these ASIH meetings, American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists meetings in Texas. So I went on to do my PhD that way with Bob Cowan at SUNY Stony Brook.
So was that when you made your first kind of initial move to this coast?
Yep, that's exactly how that happened. Again, working with movement of larvae. So this time I wasn't working just with the genetic inference of what had happened, but trying to catch them in the act. And he, in turn, introduced me, that's Bob Cowan, in turn introduced me to Ken Abel, whom he was working with on issues of recruitment of larval fishes to juveniles along the coast here. And Ken Abel was looking for a postdoc at the time, so I came here as a postdoc and transitioned into research faculty.
So how long did you wind up working with Ken?
Well, I still work with Ken. So I came here in 1999 as I'd essentially finished my dissertation, but my graduation officially was at the end of that semester. But I came here in May of 99 and began working with Ken as a postdoc, and then transitioned into research faculty as I started contributing to getting grant money for the work that we were doing together.
Now, through your work, so you became a faculty member, then how did that transition over from working there to being under the title of JC NERR?
Right. There was, the JC NERR was a presence here at Rutgers before I came here, actually. And also Mike DeLuca, who is the manager of the Jacques Cousteau Reserve, was also at the time the manager of the NERC Center. So NERC is the National University Research Program, and there's a local chapter entity, whatever, the Mid-Atlantic Research Center, or Mid-Atlantic NERC, which so those entities themselves are NOAA, as is the JC NERR. So the whole reserve system is a NOAA entity, and at the time NERP and NERC were also NOAA entities. In its kind of dying days, as it was being subsumed, one of the, well, let's back up a second. The NERC was giving out grants for that kind of money. It was a grant passed through a broker for NOAA to do that kind of work. And I applied for a grant and got a grant to use a NERC asset, which was the autonomous underwater vehicle and also passive acoustics just listening to fish under that. That was kind of in its beginnings back then, listening to fish. So I applied for a grant. I was not with the NERC then, or with the JC NERR. But after I finished that work and showed my willingness to kind of get into this technology kind of risk area of tech, Mike said, well, you'd be good as the research director for the NERC. So basically to look at proposals like my own, but now from the other side, to look at and evaluate those for the NERC, which I did. And then secondly, as the NERC was being defunded and we didn't have grant money to give out anymore, Mike decided to use the vehicle itself as a grant. So NOAA partners could essentially ask for use of the vehicle. I saw the potential for the use of the AUV in my own work on fish recruitment and fish movement, especially because by this time I was getting into telemetry or tracking larger fish. So I got involved with that, and as NERC finally was completely defunded, the AUV transitioned over to its sister NOAA entity, which was the JC NERR, still under Mike's direction. And I began working with the JC NERR more and more frequently, perhaps through the connection of the AUV, but also in general to talk to the teachers that were here under JC NERR programs and the managers that came in. So I was receiving funding through the NERR's pass-through for a while, and was involved with talks here and outreach applications and AUV applications through the JC NERR for a number of years, even going to the national meetings to present particular talks on that specialty there. So when the position opened here, I fit already and I transitioned into it. And that's fairly recently, like you said, just since not this October, but the previous 2018. So I've been here a year and a half about.
So what kind of projects are you working on at the moment?
So I continue to work on projects that come both through the NERRs and through collaborations that were formed at my Rutgers faculty position that are not through the NERRs. And some of them go together. Currently, we have an AUV demonstration development project that is actually driven by marine biological laboratories at Woods Hole. I am involved with several long-term series of fish recruitment experiments looking at both the movement of fish into the estuary as larvae and the recruitment of those fishes once they are in the estuary. And those are 30-year programs that were created by Ken Abel. And in his retirement, I'm taking kind of the lead on the day-to-day activities of those as well, and on the analysis of the patterns that we can now go to. And that actually began already, that collaboration with Ken, before he retired, but that certainly continues now.
Now, as all these projects are now starting to come to fruition, you're starting to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it. Where do you have any goals for your work here in terms of not even just maybe research and research topics in and of itself, but even just like growth of the program, or what you hope to kind of accomplish with your work here?
Yes, for sure. One of the things that the JC NERRs in particular, it's a NERR thing, and I think in particular JC NERR seems to do it really well, is outreach and taking the science to management for application, and also to the public. So K through grade, right, kindergarten through retirees. And we have fantastic involvement of retirees here through, they actually come in the field and help with the sampling, and they're crucial to that. And these are very involved people. They like to know the science beyond just being there in the field, and they transmit that to their peers, and that's exciting. And so the outreach thing in particular is something that I didn't do particularly well when I was just strictly research professor, because it's not something that was particularly valued in that system early on. It is now, more so because the funding agencies are pushing it. And one of the things that really I noticed recently and want to rectify is the kind of erosion of public trust in science.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. That was absolutely incredible. Just a really good look into, and just the precipice of a look into the way science is done, and your research in particular. And I think this would be something that's going to be amazing for our listeners here, even just to get a little sneak peek into it, to really understand what it is we're doing and the goals of which we're shooting for through these avenues. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.